last year, and I believe it might, maybe it was the third episode. Anyway, it was one of the very first episodes. We discussed, back then it was again just Simon and me. Nis wasn't born yet.
Right.
So
You know me.
we discussed the fragility of human culture, or the fragility of certain perspectives or certain beliefs. We didn't really discuss it deeply. Of human culture, of human beliefs in the face of collapse of the civilization, collapse of society, things like that. So the idea that certain views that we hold, it was just like a side note back then, certain views that we hold and what we would think a pretty self-evident truth about the universe might actually be socially conditioned. And back then it was just a like side note. I think we got there discussing a RPG, and now Simon has to jump in and help me. It's an RPG about people living in a bunker.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
Mushrooms.
Mushrooms. I do remember the mushrooms, but I think
Comrade Computer.
Comrade Computer. It's called Paranoia. A satirical take on the on the Red Scare of the Reagan era.
And then I believe there was another one which involved mushrooms. I'm not sure.
Mushrooms.
So
Right. Die Genesis, a German game,
right.
which is hundreds of years in the post-apocalypse, and the mushroom or fungus rather, is the main antagonist, if you so want.
Is it an explosion mushroom or a real mushroom?
Well, you are the biologist. Could you explain the difference?
I mean the mushroom atomic explosion makes.
Oh, no, it's a real mushroom.
Okay. It could be a metaphor.
Yeah. Now you're teaching us something about the metaphors in that. I don't think that was, like, people get so caught up with everything being vagina and phallic and whatever that they might miss stuff like that. Yeah. It could be.
But to be fair, mushrooms are really phallic, so maybe there's another metaphor.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, a couple of months ago, I got a copy of Günter Grass, mit Sophie in die Pilze gegangen, I think is the German title, like Gone with Sophie into the Mushrooms, which contains a lot of his illustrations, and it's basically just penises thinly veiled, as mushrooms. But all right, yeah, we talked about post-apocalyptic role-playing games, also about something called a dragon mushroom, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, that's going back to the topic that I'm not sure you watched that episode already, but the episode I uploaded earlier. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of intersection with other topics, right? We talked about the possibility of a future civilization creating I think, growing a computer, a mushroom as a computer, like growing a computer as a mushroom, something like that. Yeah, that goes down one avenue. That's like one of the categories of this particular topic, mushrooms in general. But what I was going for was the apocalypse category. It's going to go down that category, because so in the episode, and we're guilty again of losing track of the topics that we're going to discuss. In the episode before the English test episode, which I don't know if I'm going to release it or not. We'll have to see. So Nis brought up a topic again in that episode today, because I mentioned my professor. So now I'm just going to introduce all this conflux of lines of thought that are coming together here. In that episode I was cutting today, we were talking, that's episode 8. We're talking about the distinction art and science, which I think we've actually gone down pretty far. I'm not sure what to really add to that anymore. Even though we'll give it enough time, I'm sure there's going to be more things coming up that I can attach to that topic. But and I was mentioning my former professor, which is actually a guy I'm kind of in contact with, considering to talk about his book, which is about the distinction, and now we're getting like to the unification of this, like the trains of thought, like that's going to be the synthesis, maybe, is the distinction between socially constructed reality and objective reality. That's the topic of his book. Totally unrelated. I was looking for a easy victim, like who can I jump that I can get on the show and talk about something interesting. And so I thinking of this guy, he's kind of around like our age. It's an interesting topic. Seems like he's open to stuff like that. So I'm gonna jump him. Okay. Now he seems kind of interested. The issue is we're sort of like caught in some weird time distortion. So I'm writing him mails and I'm not getting a reply until many years later, or many weeks later, or I'm getting a reply before I even write the mail, whatever. And I'm not responding to him either, so I'm guilty of that as well. Anyway, we're gonna resolve it eventually. It's just some like minor space-time hiccup. And that's not that. And so in the last episode, Nick introduced the idea, adumbrated, maybe talking about it more in depth in another episode, is that the distinction could be between science. I think that's what you were going at, and you have to correct me if that's not actually what you meant. The distinction between science and what you said is culture is that if we lose everything, like if humanity gets bombed back to Stone Age, then what's probably going to reappear looking more or less recognizably the same is science, like whatever objective reality, and the cultural things are going to be very different. And I suspect with culture you mean that what I was thinking couldn't be differentiated as being art. And I think you were trying to make this distinction by saying there's a certain kind of knowledge or certain kind of beliefs, or let's just say informational content. Because I'm going to want to introduce that like science produces knowledge, because that's exactly and art doesn't, because that's exactly the distinction I was going to try to deconstruct. I'm not going to reintroduce that. But I think what you were saying is there are certain kinds of information that are going to reappear in the same way if we have to start back from zero. And we can, of course, like I guess we could also say, like in another world that's like physically like ours, like parallel universe, whatever, that has the same physical characteristics as ours, we're probably going to end up with with some of the same beliefs or some of the same informational content, and some that is very different. And the one that we could call science, because it deals with objective things about the universe. And the other one is like kind of vague, imaginary things. And yeah, and I thought that would be an interesting topic to like kind of bring these three things together and maybe introduce the possibility of, once that space-time discontinuity, whatever is fixed, we can lead into getting somebody who actually knows about this kind of thing and has written a big book about it, and at least we'll be a bit prepared, and then he can just show us how unprepared we really are. Yeah, that's what I thought. That would be an interesting topic to discuss.
Yeah.
And yeah, and as Nis had this idea, maybe I'll just leave it to him to introduce what he's thinking about it.
My thoughts are relatively good put in your words there. I have not that much to say to it after that. For now, at least. At least I would say that for the moment. Most of the stuff I was thinking about it all is dictate. Yeah. Maybe Simon, you have something to
well, maybe. Well, I do have a lot of things to say, but I'm not sure whether they are actually interesting or thoughtful. I think most people do have this idea of science as being exact and irrefutable, which actually is contrary to the scientific method, as far as I know. But if we assume that this understanding of science actually is right or true or whatever, I think we could at least claim that a certain amount of science would be reproduced in a parallel universe or a post-apocalyptic Earth or whatever. But I'm afraid if we say given enough time or something like that, everything would be reproduced. We're entering the realm of truisms because given enough time, anything is possible. So to make it a bit more, to illustrate a bit better what I mean right now, let's give me an example. Pretty sure the post-apocalyptic human, second or third generation, that's not that important, will find ways to grow corn, to domesticate animals, stuff like that. But maybe their interest this time is not so much in navigating the stars, thus articulating the system of astronomy, etc., but rather the speed of the leaves of grass growing or whatever. This is right now a bit stream of consciousness, and I hope you can follow me. But what I am trying to get at is that while the hard sciences may be exact, and I'm pretty sure math, physics, etc. are, humans are not, and everything that's not directly related to their surviving could take another form.
Yeah, I would say that's a good point for that, to that, because that's probably a big asterisk to my first point. Everything, it will, in this thought experiment, even when we will set everything to zero, we will not see the same things exactly. Like maybe a universal constant for the distance unit is the first time they tried something like that, like in our world, a meter. Maybe they used I don't know what could be a relatively good universal constant for that. The length of a bambus shoot growing in 1 week, maybe. But I would say the base constant that lie beneath that will be still the same.
Yeah.
We use the smallest portion of the speed of light. Speed of light will be still the same. How we interpret that will be most likely different.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Or do you think we are completely mistaken, Martin?
I don't think you're mistaken. What I'm trying to do, like I'm already sold on this premise, but I'm trying to, of course, still defend my idea that art provides information as well. And I think, like, one thing I've often wondered about one thing. So when I was in school, I used to read Oswald Spengler. I don't know if that tells anyone anything. It's like a pessimist.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's right. The decline of the West and so on. And he has this idea that every culture or every civilization has its own view of the world, and when eventually the book closes on that civilization, their view of the world doesn't make sense to anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Like the other civilizations doesn't really make sense to the other civilizations, and there's gonna be the time when he's kind of ambiguous on that, but his initial thesis is like when the time comes for the book to close on Western civilization, and decline doesn't mean what a lot of people would understand it to mean. It doesn't mean that like he's saying we're living in the at his time, that was shortly before World War II, we're living in the winter of Western civilization. So Western culture is about to come to an end, but that doesn't actually mean it's going to, like, we're looking at the end of Western civilization. What he means is the culture is going to be, it's going to complete itself, and after that, it's going to be a civilization, which means it could continue for several millennia. But it's kind of maybe a Warhammer 40k idea, maybe just hinting at a connection there. I mean, it's obviously not an inspiration, but similarity. So what he's saying is eventually a culture turns into a civilization, and civilization is just stagnant, and it's going to be. He says this about China, for example. He says the Chinese culture was finished at some point, and after that it became Chinese civilization. And the Chinese civilization continues for several thousands of years. It still does, but it's stagnant. That's what he said. We could argue, is that still true? I don't know.
I feel a little bit itchy about it. Alone from this feeling, our culture is still evolving. The Chinese culture was still evolving. I think maybe that's somewhat of these Western superiority feeling from this time. So all the old great civilizations, they are no longer evolving. They are no longer important. We are important.
Well, yeah.
Maybe it's from that, but I don't know his writing, so I cannot say that correctly, and I am not a sociologist student or someone who takes too much, reads too much from things like that. So I don't know. But it has it sounds a little bit like this. From this time, you often have this looking down, the Western position, looking down on other civilizations and saying, yeah, they already had their great cultures and now they are only wild people, in big quotation marks, or they never had a high civilization. So I don't know. It sounds a little bit like that.
I don't know either. Like, what can a single person without any quantitative research find out just by writing a book, right? Like, who knows? Like, there's a lot of people who are taken seriously still today, like, obviously more on the conservative side. I personally don't think, but that's like going like down a totally different avenue right now. I personally don't think he's that kind of cultural supremacist, actually, because he affords every culture the same level. He just says they all have their own time. He's actually saying like Western civilization is about to end, and a lot of people have found out that a lot of his predictions turned out to be correct. Like, some people have said this in regard to Trump, because he says there's going to be business magnates are going to rule politics, whatever. It's not really important, but then he says like the next civilization is, or the next culture is going to be the Russian one. I don't know if he was thinking about what he was thinking about, because he wasn't thinking about the communists which of course back then was a very new thing, because he said communism is just another deformation of the like new Russian culture by Western thought being exported to it, and they're using it without really understanding it. But anyway, that's not really my point. My point is, like, why I'm talking about him is because of this idea of each culture having its own worldview and its own kind of progress. And that's something like I always find unaesthetic or unappealing or a bit sad about our world. And this is something like I thematically agree on with modern-ish, maybe like 60s, 70s critique of the idea of development. Because the dominant Western view would be there is just one path for all civilizations, and you have like developing countries and you have developed countries, maybe you have something in the middle. But really, like, everybody is moving like in the same way, and people who are just poor or have like believe weird stuff, they're just not developed. So that's actually, I would say, a more Eurocentric, I wouldn't say Eurocentric, but Euro-Americano-centric view of the world. And I was never really like, I don't know if it's true or not, but it didn't appeal to me aesthetically that to live in a world that's that way, where it was just like, there's just like one system and one progress, and everybody is going to go through the same steps and eventually end up in the same place. And that's kind of like, I would like to live in a world that this is going to be sound a lot less critical of leftist ideas than I usually am, but I would love to live in a world where there could be different things. Developments could go a different way. And I think, so I love this website called TV Tropes. I think I bring that up occasionally. This, it has a site, and I really have to think about, like, remember to link this. It's called Tech Tree. Of course, we know what a tech tree is. It's like a feature of strategy games. I'm not going to introduce it, but this idea, like metaphorically, this idea of technology being like a progressive system where you have to unlock one step and then you unlock the next step, like it all builds on each other, and there is no real way for things to have gone different. Maybe in some like small parts, but that's like metaphorically in a lot of works, the idea that technology is mostly linear with some detours, progress, and it can just go pretty much one way. You can't have one thing before the other things. And yeah, and I don't know if that's true. And I want to like just contrast, like pull something into this discussion that is kind of more a recent development. We know so many things now. I know the average age, so we're all getting old. Like even Nis was saying, oh, time going so fast, whatever. So we're all getting old. So I always like look at the ages when people do stuff. And just to comfort myself, I could still write a novel when I'm 42 or whatever. So, and the average age of Nobel Prize winners in physics was like something like 35 or something like that, or maybe 40. I don't actually remember, but it's gone up now. It's almost 60. And the explanation for that is there's so much stuff that we know right now. We have so much knowledge already that to contribute something to that, you need to learn so many things. It takes you such a long time before you can, before you can understand like all of and comprehend and synthesize all of this knowledge before you can actually make the next step. That's something really interesting to me. And what happens is that, and I mean, this has been going on for a long time, is that subjects diversify, right? And now we're talking like, how can we work, like how can we do interdisciplinary science? Well, why do you have to do that? Because now we have a lot of subjects that all deal with certain very specialized topics, just because there is no single, like being a Renaissance man is not feasible anymore. That's why we say like, who is the last Renaissance man? Was it Goethe? I don't know. Maybe it was Humboldt. I don't know. But yeah, it's just not feasible that somebody is a specialist, like manages to be a specialist in sociology and physics and biology and like even within physics, like astrophysics, quantum physics, particles, or whatever. Like there's too many things to learn. Just like in one lifetime with a human brain, it's just too much. And I would say now we're talking about, of course, like resetting all of this. So maybe what I'm going to say is not true, but I could imagine that specifically now, like take half of humanity right now and they're moving to some far off space colony with all of their knowledge, and then we isolate Earth from that colony, whatever, warp storm happens, no contact for 3 millennia, and then they meet again. I think the technology will have developed very differently because there's too many lanes you could take. I don't know if there's eventually I'm almost done, but I don't know if there's eventually a cap on knowledge. Like there's a point where you know everything, like at least every generalization. Of course, you're not going to be God and know the position of every grain of sand and whatever. But I mean, like in general, in terms of laws and methods. I don't know if that happens, like if there is a cap on that, if you can ever know all of the laws and all of the generalizations, or maybe even if there isn't, if there's eventually a point where taking the next step to knowing more is such a huge step that you might end up pursuing a different direction instead. So if you wait for a very long time, they end up maybe not knowing everything, but knowing pretty similar things, even though they arrived there in different stages, like took different paths, but eventually like covered the entire area of things that's possible to know. I don't know if that's comprehensible, but I would say if that's not the case, if it's not the case that eventually there's some sort of cap, then I think the further you move away from knowing nothing, the more likely it is that two societies are going, even in the same universe, are going to develop very different sciences or very different corpi of knowledge, just because the surface area of this bubble of what you know just grows the more you know, and you have so many different avenues that you can take and research and whatever. And I mean that's true of many cultures. I think, like, actually I would say, and again I'm a historian originally, so but I would, even though I wouldn't say like I know about this particular subject very well, it would be interesting to discuss with actual historians. I think it's a pretty unique situation that and that's going to be Euro-Americano-centric again, but I think it's a pretty unique situation that our civilization is the one whose knowledge supersedes the knowledge of everybody else. We can talk about, like, there's some tribes in the Amazons that know how to cure some things with some herbs that they find in their forest. Okay, and we don't know about that. Okay, but for the vast majority of things, Western knowledge, which again, like footnote on that, a lot of this knowledge isn't generated by Westerners anymore at all. It's just, it follows a certain Western attire and scheme. For example, people have a PhD, even though they're maybe Indians, whatever, and they dress in suits and they work at universities. So we call that Western knowledge. That's fine. But I'm going to say, I think it's a pretty unique situation that you have one civilization whose knowledge supersedes almost all of the others. I don't think that's historically been true before. But I'm pretty sure the Roman Empire could have learned something from, I don't know, the Aztecs. I mean, there's a big time gap between them, but still. And things like that, or like ancient China could definitely learn things from Rome, and Rome could learn things from ancient China. And so even back then, they obviously went in different directions. And that's just a difference of a few centuries, of course. And you'd say, like, give them more time and they would have developed the exact same body of knowledge, maybe. But yes, let's be just finish this one.
Okay.
Yes. So and that's so where was I going with that? Right. So what I think is we're going back to zero. I think, yeah, given the same amount of time, somebody would probably arrive at the same point again. I think, and there's some basic things that would be rediscovered. I'm pretty sure of that. Like we're talking about, like whatever crop rotation, domestication of animals, things like that would be rediscovered. But I'm pretty sure some basic tales would be rediscovered as well. I'm pretty sure there are tales, and that's a topic for anthropology, but I'm pretty sure there are tales, like works of culture, that are going to reappear again and again. There's probably going to be the hero with 1,000 faces again and stuff like that.
Or
because it happened there before, so probably happen again.
two things. First, knowledge was flowing from China to Rome and from Rome to China, so there was some connection.
Yes.
So, to that, there were no singular entities. There was a giant gap between them, and the knowledge was somewhat limited, but there was some flow of knowledge and goods. I think the Romans really liked the silk from China. And the other thing was, oh god damn it! Now I forgot it already. Yeah. Okay. No, I forgot it already. I focused too much on the first point, and speaking in another language still needs too much brain power to remember the point before. Okay, so that was my point to that. Shortly.
Well, maybe you will remember it at some point in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, well, I wouldn't say it boils down to, but an important factor is the production and distribution of knowledge. And historically, the West, let's just call it the West. Funny enough, a couple of days ago, I read a Reddit post by, I don't know whom, some Reddit user, who called America, the US, the West. Europe wasn't the West for him. So it's just, well, it's a question of perspective, I would say. But the West was, over the course of the last maybe 300 years, so forceful, so I don't even know what I want to say in German, sorry. So controlled the world so much, lots of the known world, that subaltern voices had very big problems to even generate, even less distribute knowledge. And I think under different circumstances, Western culture, and this is of course a truism, would look different, but would also be subaltern to maybe Indian culture, Chinese culture, Aztec culture. I guess human history is a series of coincidences and accidents, and well, the West was, well, most people wouldn't say lucky, but the West had the fortune to control the world for 200-300 years and prescribe ways of knowledge, of distribution, production, and even of preservation of knowledge.
I remembered my second point.
Yes.
Yeah, it was to the stories you told, the same stories that will be emerging. There are some, when I remember correctly, there are some interesting stories or theories that are not the same stories that are emerging. They are based on the same oldest story, you could call that. There are some really good YouTubers who try to decode it as far as you can do it today, and look at that. Hey, what is the story behind the connecting story behind the Indo-European god deity cult or stories, and it's really interesting because there are so many connecting stories that, yeah, when you look what is similar, you can somewhat rebuild a earlier story. And I think in the same direction, I remembered hearing that there is a story about a star sign in the sky, and in the story, in the beginning there were 8 personifications of stars, and one of them died. And that's a really weird story for something such constant like stars. But in that constellation, 100,000 years ago, there was this 8 star. So there are some theories that this story is so old that it's remembered these 8 star. I don't know. I find that really interesting. And yeah, stories are our oldest way to remember our knowledge. And I think that's some really important part of being human. I don't know. Some other species have, I think, some similar things to, but our oral history is really important to us and to our being ourselves. And yeah, I personally find that really interesting to see these stories and how maybe old some of the old bases.
Yeah. That actually sounds really interesting, and I will look it up a bit further.
I can send you the YouTube channel I mainly watch for that.
That would be great. Martin wanted to say something, I believe.
Yes.
I don't even remember what I was going to say, but I want to say something to that. I think there's like 3 competing views on. It's not just about these interculturally, eerily consistent stories, but generally on cultural practices or knowledge. I think it's like there's the view that like they originated independently in different parts of the world, and there's the view that they are the result of some original population coming up with them, and then they survived in some shape or form after that population, like after different branches of that population went to different parts of the world. And then there's a diffusionist view, which is that, well, they didn't have them originally, but some group came up with them, and then they distributed them after those groups were already settled in different parts of the world. And they somehow got distributed. I think that's the 3 views. I mean, I think that's exhaustive of the logical possibilities as well. I can't imagine any other thing than independent origination or distribution in some form. So yeah, but I don't think there's a definite answer on how that worked. Yeah.
Most likely, as so often, it's probably a mixture of all 3. And some. I remember the same thing. The flood myth is so prevalent in so many cultures. For some simple reason, humans like to settle in the near water, and sometimes the water will rise suddenly, and there will be flooding. And probably you tell a story about the flooding when you survive it. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe. But I think that
some basic themes will be in different stories, and for the reason that it's a basic human experience, or maybe it was a basic human experience, but flooding is still a problem. And then some other stories are more like, yeah, that seems like a base. But yeah, that's my opinion to that.
Yeah, but I think now we're getting pretty much at the core of the issue, which is what is contingent and what is just part of the human experience. Now, I would love to bring in some like Jordan Peterson stuff, because like I think his original book was about that. even Jungian stuff, but I don't really know about those. I don't know, maybe there's a Jungian school of theory. I don't know if there is. I think we discussed that before. I don't think there is.
No,
but,
it's actually
yeah,
lots of Freudian and Lacanian stuff. Jung is a bit, well, on the fringes.
Which is kind of interesting to me, because I think he's the one that would be most suitable, actually, because that's at least the one who himself did the most, like went the furthest in approaching the topic of narration or human stories. So that's kind of interesting to me that he didn't make it. But that's maybe, again, that's maybe a contingency. Maybe in the other parallel universe, he's very prominent. I would say that's like, that could have gone. I think that's one of the areas of science, if you want to say it's science. I think that's one of the areas of science that could have gone very differently. But yeah, but my point was going to be, I mean, that's the core issue. Like, really, what is part of the human experience? Now you're saying, well, if you're gonna survive, and that was just a random like half clause in what you said. Well, if you're surviving a flood, then you're gonna tell a story about it. That's right, but that's the important thing. You are bringing your human attribute of telling a story about surviving a flood. It doesn't just take you surviving a flood. It also takes your human tendency, which I guess we're already assuming that humans share. They're going to tell a story about it. And are there other things that are likely going to happen and that humans are likely going to have the response of telling a story about too? And I think that's not implausible. I don't think, for example, I don't know, we have this idea that like love is a modern invention. And again, maybe that could have gone differently. I don't really know what that means, because I think it's an emotion. Can you invent an emotion? I don't know. That's a topic for another day, maybe. That like adumbrate my idea of sentiments here. But let's say the emotion of love is going to be something that's a human constant. And apparently we have the response of telling a story about it for some reason. And again, that's the question I have in general, is the stories, why are certain stories considered to be more valuable or telling? Is it because that they're popular means they somehow appeal more? Are stories like memes? Do stories get repeated more when they like pluck the right strings in our hearts, and then we tend to repeat them more. We probably tend to pay more money for them. I don't know. Like, if you make a movie and it has plucks the right heartstrings, like there's a couple there and there's an action scene, So how does that work? Like, why are some stories preferred? And are there a lot of stories that somebody tells, but they're just weird and don't really chime with our intuition of how stories should go? And so they get forgotten, and the guy becomes, I think we discussed this in a previous episode, and I don't think we have an answer to that. And the guy just becomes forgotten. I don't know, but yeah, I think there's going to be universal human experiences, and there are going to be stories about that. Are they always going to take the same form? Probably not. Like, after we nuke the world, the Shakespeare of 5000 AD, probably his characters are not going to be called Romeo and Juliet, and maybe they're not going to take. Where does it take place? I think in Florence, somewhere in Italy. So maybe it's not going to take place in Florence. Maybe the story is going to take place in the ruins of New York, and there's going to be two hostile raider clans and whatever. So it's going to look different. Just like the meter might not be based on the fraction of the speed of light, but it's going to be based on the rate of growth of a bamboo shoot or whatever. Or maybe the British Empire will rise again. We'll all use the imperial system. Who knows? But my point is, yeah, it could happen. Like, maybe they come. I mean, this is again like very popular with Japanese RPGs, like post-apocalyptic steampunk. Who knows? Like, maybe we'll just be medievals, and then suddenly the British Empire comes knocking with their steamships.
And suddenly the British Empire. Okay, the more you know.
Yeah, and there's a universe for that as well. It's a very rare type of universe, but I'm sure they're out there. Just doesn't happen very often. Across the whole spectrum of possibilities. But yeah, so and there's going to be certain universal experiences. And now again, like, is that Are they comparable? Are they different? I think that's a matter of interpretation again. Does it convey the same message? Are you going to have, and I brought this up in the other episode I was cutting today, Death of Ivan Illich. I don't know. It tells a big truth about, and I found that so interesting when I read that. I think it's the original midlife crisis, maybe it's the solution to the original solution to the midlife crisis. So this guy does not live his true life, whatever. Then he's about to die, and then he realizes what's really important in life, and so on and so forth. And when you read a lot about, so just going to bring this together, I'm sure most psychologists or most people who've written or talked about midlife crisis or having a midlife crisis or the midlife crisis of other people, why do they happen? I'm sure they haven't read this book, but the theme crops up again. The people are not living their people are thinking I'm wasting my life, I'm not living the life I should be living, I have to re-examine myself. I mean, that's the kind of strand of thought on midlife crisis that I'm more sympathetic to. There's also the strand that says oh, it's just a guy buying a sports car, whatever. Why does he do that? I don't know, he wants to be young again, whatever. Well, if you dig more deeply, or at least if you go with the strand that I'm more sympathetic to, it's people are it's not like people are trying to be young again or whatever. They're just re-examining their life and trying to find something to do that has a meaning, and it's actually a progress in life. They're trying to get to a point of doing something that has a meaning after living in the illusion that making money or having a career is what they should be doing. I mean, maybe it is. For some people it might be. I'm not going to criticize that. But some people get to a certain age and they think, well, this isn't actually what I should be doing. I should be doing something else before I die. Okay. And that's kind of, I'm sure the psychologists who've written about that have not read Death of Ivan Illich, but I think it's an interesting thing. And then interesting parallel. And then you bring in things like near-death experiences, which again, and I'm not sure if the Death of Ivan Illich is based on near-death experiences. It's 200 years old book, right? Couldn't have been a lot of them back then, even though there were some in ancient Greece, but whatever. So, and then there's parallels there as well. People die and they meet a bright light, and the bright light, whatever, tells them it's not your time, you go back and whatever. I mean, it's Ivan Illich's time, but my point is they come back and then suddenly they have a new idea of what life is for. It's for loving people and whatever. And it's not for money or for your career. And these seem to be things that crop up in a lot of places now. That might just be my interpretation of them, but I see a lot of parallels here. And I think things like that are going to crop up again and again, and they're going to look different, just like the meter might look different. I mean, it's not going to be a meter, but I mean, distances are going to be measured differently and things like that. I still agree there is a difference between those things, the things that are going to show up again and the things that are probably going to be vastly different. But I don't think it's as facile as saying, well, the stories and stuff, and they're going to be totally different, and then there's knowledge and it's going to be the same. I think there is a distinction, but I don't think it's that easy. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty good cliffhanger, because while I think it's a very clever thought, but right now, off the bat, I can't actually say anything substantial to that.
I'm honest, I also need maybe some time to think about all the things we said today.
Okay. Yeah, maybe it's a nice forward. Maybe we can discuss more about it next time. Maybe with my professor.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, that would really be great. I mean, he's a specialist on that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you again for being here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us, and goodbye.
Yeah. Have a nice
Goodbye.
evening.
Talk to you next time.
See you later.